Hello everybody. Welcome to I Read Sometimes. Happy Friday. I hope you guys made it through this week. I unfortunately did not. Around there about Tuesday, my body decided that girl, we're not gonna do this anymore. We're not coming. It gave me like a mean flu slash sinuses. So I've just been recovering from that. But how you guys doing? You guys let's chat in the comment section. But today we are covering The Narrowing by Dudu Busani-Dube, which is another Kindle, it's another Kindle book. It's another Kindle short story, a 40-pager. So yeah, let's get into it. So just a bit of background on how I got started on this book and why I read this book. I, like a lot of other South African people, were introduced to Dudu Busani-Dube through her Shomu the Wife series of books. So I had read all of them up until Mess, right? Before the last one came out. And after Mess, it had really broke me down. So emotionally, I was not in a good place, and I decided that I wanted closure. I was looking for other books that this author had written, just to get closure in another story from her, which now I know I shouldn't have done that, but I did it anyway. And when I read up on her, I saw that she had a short story that she had released on Amazon Kindle, and it was a 40-pager called The Narrowing. So this book is the reason why I started reading through Kindle, because I was like, you know what, take all of my money, I just want closure. This book is about a girl called Usfundo, who were taken from her childhood throughout until the book ends when she's middle-aged. It's about a girl who's had quite a traumatic childhood, but she's managed to overcome all of that and still make a success out of herself. She goes to school, gets the job, gets the house, gets the car, but she still has a complicated relationship with her family. So she reaches out to find her father, right? And as she's growing her relationship with her father, the unthinkable happens. They start a sexual relationship. She has a sexual relationship with her own biological father. So that is the premise of this book. The premise of it is quite grotesque. It will shake your mind up. It will shock you. You're like, okay, I didn't expect that this short story will go this direction. It does have sort of a synopsis that really gives you a picture into what how it is. And I'll read that for you. It says, it was that and you knew it, that you held on things and let them pile up on your shoulders. They didn't mold into a hunchback. That's why you were always able to stand up straight and look life in the eye. But the things, they did settle in your belly and you couldn't vomit them. So you vomited people instead. So yeah. So this book is written in second person, which is quite an interesting way to write a book, I presume, but certainly interesting to read a book written in second person. So an example of this, instead of it saying I, and you're following the character and you're in their mind, or it's like a third person, just like a general being narrating whatever story is happening, it uses a lot of you. So it's very like confrontational while you're reading it. For example, the first sort of line of it is, in exactly 1 hour, you will die. So, and it says you died for the first time when you were 9. So at first, it sort of feels like the author is making you this character, because she keeps on saying you. Is it me, the reader? Will I die? You can look at it in different ways. Another one would be that Usfundo, the main character, we're sort of getting a Sfundo, maybe an older Sfundo or maybe a younger Sfundo, narrating or telling another version of herself that, hey, in about 10 minutes you're gonna die. This is what happened to you. So it's an interesting premise to look at who exactly is you in the story. This book can be divided into the number of deaths Usfundo has. And when you first read it, it says, okay, you've died 5 times, right? And when I was reading it, I thought, did this main character actually die 5 times? Is this like a supernatural come back to life and then die again? So those deaths are really interesting, but in this specific context, the deaths are just when she died in my translation emotionally. So she died 5 times during her lifetime, and these deaths can also be translated into the emotional traumas, all of the baggage, like the big pillars of this trauma that she has are all of these deaths. The first trauma is that Usfundo accidentally was responsible for killing her little sister. So she was still young, at around 8 or 9, and she was responsible for looking after the baby, and the baby died, and a lot of her family blamed her, right? And then at 15, which is the second death, she sort of burnt. The house that they were living in burnt, and her skin also burnt. So she had a lot of issues with her appearance, and it just came with a lot of baggage. That was the second death or second trauma. The third one is when we get to the part where she actually finds her father and then has a sexual relationship with him. That was the third death. The fourth one, in my opinion, is when all of these other deaths are consuming her, all these other traumas are consuming her, and they're leading her ethics into a sort of gray area, to a point where at work she starts getting into corruption and she feels nothing. She's just like cold and she doesn't care. She gets into like a huge corruption. For me, that was her fourth death. And her fifth death is now that she's being caught for all of this corruption, right? So that's how this short story is divided or unfolded into the deaths or traumas. So yeah, if you guys remember how I said, I read this book because I wanted closure from Mess. Mess had a lot of trauma in it. I'm sure you can tell by now that I didn't get the closure I was looking for, because this just added a lot of other trauma. It was quite a difficult one to read, but it was a necessary read. It really was a necessary read, because when you're reading the story and you're reading about Usfundo, you have that thing that, okay, things will eventually be okay, right? Yes, she's had this trauma, but things will eventually be okay. She'll fix her mistakes, or she will just be okay. And you see how she also downplays all of these traumas that she's had, and she thinks she's okay. And she's developed sort of a coping mechanism. The fact that she was able to go to school, able to live such a successful life after her trauma, I think, in my opinion, makes her think that she's fine and she's okay and she's overcome that trauma, not knowing what this trauma is actually doing, and it's actually consuming her, and she hasn't healed her inner child, or hasn't looked at all of these trauma and how it affected her. And yeah, trauma is basically killing her. It really got me thinking about a lot of traumas that we have in South Africa. And yeah, because the nice thing about Dudu is she is South African. Usfundo's from Elamontville, so you can relate to her story. Her mother was an alcoholic. There are a lot of traumas that we take lightly in South Africa because it's such a common situation that happens, not realizing that the people coming from these backgrounds, and we see them successful, you never know how much that trauma has impacted them. And with therapy being like something not taken seriously in our community, a lot of these people just go unchecked, and I'm sure there are a lot of coping styles that they adopt. For example, my idea, or another person's idea of a trauma coping in adulthood would be like typical of drugs, hypersexuality, or yeah, or be a lot of addictions, eating disorders, or being addicted to alcohol. That would be like a telltale sign that okay, maybe something's not okay. But there are less common things that people adopt. In Sfundo's case, it was having a sexual relationship with her father. And something about this short story reminded me of a movie that I had watched. I don't know if you guys had watched a movie called Third Person. It's about a writer who cannot feel, but feels through the characters in which he writes. And this writer is sort of also pursuing a relationship with a woman, and this woman happens to also have a sexual relationship with her father. So if you guys would watch that movie, I think this short story would relate to that. You'd sort of get a feeling into what you're getting yourself into. But also the nice thing about this short story is that you will recognize it more, because in that movie it is someone from a different country, but with this short story, it's a South African short story. You will find yourself in some of the characters or some of the traumas even that she experiences, right? So yeah, this book overall was amazing for me. It was not nice to read, but actually allowing your mind to read about that and see the seriousness that trauma comes with, and some of the things that are unspoken that people go through or people experience, is quite an eye-opener, right? And it forces me to look within, to not just play my life in a autopilot and think just because things seem to have sorted themselves out, like in my life, according to society standards, that I'm okay. You never know what traumas your inner child, you know how psychology always speaks about the inner child, and you need to heal yourself from all of the trauma that the child you has experienced in order to make sure you're okay. So yeah, it's about that. It's about checking and always self-introspecting that am I okay, and being open to therapy and actually speaking about your childhood. And you might think that you've had a great childhood, and that some had it worse than you, but it's always important to self-introspect and always know where you are in life, because if you go autopilot like how Sfundo did, you might find yourselves into a deeper layer of death that would be very difficult to now get out of, and you also wouldn't be willing to get out of it. So yeah, that's what I took from the book. Please tell me down below if you would be reading this book, or what you think about the premise of this book, or if you've watched the movie Third Person. And yeah, that is it from my side. We will chat in the comment section, and I will see you next Friday. Bye guys.